Hello and welcome to another Chat with Pros. We're so glad that you've decided to join us today. This series is about exposing people in the music community to different places that music can take you in your life. And we've talked to session musicians and songwriters and artists, and today we're going in a different direction. We're talking to an incredible friend of mine, an incredible person named Justin Resnick. Now, Justin Resnick is an old friend of mine, someone I've known for, almost more than 20 years now. We grew up in Baltimore City together, and music took us in totally different directions. When we were young, we were in bands together, and as we grew older, I went into the performing aspect of music, and Justin went into music therapy, and this was a place where he really thrived. Justin received his master's degree from Cal State Northridge, and he is currently the clinical director for a place called Victory Care, which specializes in ABA therapy. Justin's skills include psychology and behavioral analysis, and he specializes in working with kids that are on the autism spectrum. So Justin has an incredible background in how to use adaptive learning and student-led learning to continue to make sure that students thrive and continue to work towards very specific goals. And so today we're talking to Justin about motivation and the role that motivation plays in a student's life, especially in the very beginning, and how important mentors are and guides are along that way to make sure that the path is navigated well, not necessarily to create more musicians, but to create more people that are more in tune with the world, more empathetic, more creative, and just more free and empowered, and using music as kind of a vehicle for that. And that's very much what has happened in Justin's life. Justin is still an incredible musician, an incredible singer and songwriter, but he uses music in this arena, and he's so successful at it. So we're going to jump right into our conversation. Let's join Justin Resnick. All right, I'm here with Justin Resnick, one of my longest friends that I've known in my life. And we're here today to kind of talk about the journey in terms of how music can impact your life and the places that it can take you. We're always trying to think outside the box. We're always trying to expand people's imagination in terms of the role that the arts in general can play in a child's life and how that can manifest over time. So Justin and I met when I was only 13, I think. And yeah, you might know better than me. And we've been on this incredible journey together. And somehow from Baltimore, Maryland, where we grew up, now we live just 30 minutes from each other here in Los Angeles. So Justin, would you, if you don't mind, give us a little bit of a history on what role did music, how did you find music? How did it find you? And then how did that get you here?
Oh, wow. And thank you. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. So, music was always a part of my life. My father was an avid musician. Our fathers actually knew each other and played together a little bit. But when I when I was a kid, I just loved rock and roll very much, and nothing made me feel quite as good. And I started with the marching band and the orchestral middle school band and everything, but eventually when I discovered that I could also play rock and roll with my friends, that just became a major passion for me, and it was just a very rewarding experience. And you were there.
I was there. I think remember now that I saw you perform at a church solo, just you and piano. Before we ever started playing music together, I went to see a show, and I think Ken was a mutual friend of ours. Ken was supposed to be there, and then he bailed on me like last minute, so I was there by myself. But I remember that, and I remember just being so impressed because I couldn't stand up in front of people and sing at all, and nothing would have scared me more than that. But you were fearless at that time. You were totally fearless.
I'm glad it appeared that way. It was terrifying. I remember that show at the church. It was my first time playing by myself in front of people. And I saw somebody do it, and he was very inspiring. His name was Tim Kay. But I tried to model myself a little bit after him and insert elements of my own style. And I definitely felt the fear, but it was a great experience. And yeah, you can play music by yourself. You can play with others. It's flexible that way.
Yeah, and so to fast forward a little bit, when I was probably 15, I was in a band with a mutual friend of ours, and he was in a second band with you called Latchkey. Way back then, Latchkey, to me, from my perspective, was like an evolved version of our band. The better songs, more thought out songwriting in general, and I remember being kind of enamored by the band with Ben in it and you and going to see you guys, and I was like, oh man, I want to be in that band. and and then I think further down the line, you came to a birthday party of mine that was maybe my 15th birthday, honestly, and you could drive because you were a little older, and you came down in your car, and I remember you got out of the car, and this was a Geo. They didn't even make those cars anymore, and it wasn't like a cool car, but it was a car. Nobody else had a car, so you had one, and that's all it took. And when you got out of the car, I was like, oh, that's what cool looks like. Oh man, but that's how I felt back then at 15. And you were a little bit older again, and so I was just kind of, man, he can drive. He's got this great band, and his band is like, you got a record at the time. You guys had done like a record, like with Mike Rocco, I think, or
That's right. Yeah, we made
yeah,
that first record at Mike Rocco's house in his studio, and yeah, we spent a lot of time on those songs. We rehearsed them a lot obsessively, and we really polished them to the point that we felt we were ready to do it. Of course, I look back on it now, and it's mostly for nostalgia. And in our musicianship today, we would probably do things a little differently than we would have back then. But at the time, that was our capstone. That was our most. That was like the greatest product that we could make at the time.
and yeah, and it showed for all of our ages that that was a more mature thing than what you know I was musically capable of at the point. And I remember when I heard that, it's planted the seed that I'm going to be in that band one day. I want to be in that band down the line. And as fate would have it, that is how it wound up. And Justin and I joined a band, a further down the line version of that band called Verdict. And then we were in that band for many more years. And just recently, a mutual friend of ours gave us this gift of this album that we made when we were like, I don't even know, 16 years old or something. And he put all of the tickets on the back, the tickets of all of the shows that we had played when we were kids, which is so cool because we had played tons and tons of concerts over the time from ninth grade till we graduated from high school. And he kept all of those tickets. So we have the dates. We know exactly when they all happened and who they were with. And there was a flyer on there with a ticket next to it. And I believe it was July 23rd was the date. And it was the year 2000. And that was the very first show at the Record Theater where Afterlife played, which was my band. And the opening act was Latchkey, which was your band. And that was the first show of many, many, many shows. But we have that flyer. We know that date. And I just think that's so cool.
Yeah, that is a time capsule. I love that.
22 years ago. So we fast forward now. I graduate from high school. You graduate from high school. We go our different directions. Then what happened?
Well, when I was studying music, I was also very interested in psychology, and that led me to combine the two and study music therapy. And as a career, music therapy never quite worked out for me, but I found a passion for therapy in general and psychology, and I found that I was talented in terms of behavioral psychology. And many years later, it's been 14 years in the industry for me now, but I'm a clinical director for Victory Care, and we provide therapy services to children with disabilities. And basically, we help desperate parents to teach their kids how to talk and to cope and to learn.
That's just so inspiring. It's amazing. So when we're talking about this age kind of bracket, most of the students that we interact with Sound Life are between the ages of 8 and 18. That's kind of the bulk of the students that we interact with. How from your perspective, in terms of communicating and instilling inspiration and motivation in kids when so much is changing in their lives, they have so many events going on, they're being pulled in so many different directions, and especially now with social media and a lot of distractions going on, how do we relate to kids? How do we talk to each? How do parents relate to their children?
Well, that's such an individualized, that it's so individual. One has to really know the children and know their interests and the personal things about them in order to relate to them best, especially at those young ages. So I think that coming from a perspective of when I was your age, it it doesn't really resonate with children because it just doesn't feel like what they're going through in their life. So I would say that when relating to children, know their interests and use that to your advantage. To talk to children of that age, the best thing is to know their interests and relate to them on their level and take an interest in their interests, know what they're about and listen to some of their music, experience some of what they're going through, and listen to some of their drama. When you build that rapport and children feel like they can trust you, they're so much more likely to listen to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And so if we paint a picture of, it's the very first lesson, someone has gotten very excited about learning the piano or the drums, and who knows why. It might you this is an actual what sparks that. There's so many different stimuluses that stimuli that come into our sphere that say you should do this, try that. Sometimes it's our parents pushing us, but sometimes kids go to their parents and ask for something, and the parents have no idea where it came from. But let's paint this picture of a very first lesson. How can a parent be involved and engaged, but not overbearing, to help stimulate that inspiration and that motivation and keep it going?
Well, the first thing is to notice those little incremental units of further success and to be genuinely impressed by that. So it's very easy to see that progress is being made and to want to push that child to the next level, but take a moment to acknowledge that incremental progress that your child is making. So if they played that chord just a little bit clearer, let them know that sounds more crisp. That sounds better. How whatever language it is that you use with your children, and and before pushing to the next level, let them digest and revel in what they've done.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that the reward system is very, very important, and acknowledgement is very, very important. I think learning an instrument, it's not always instantly gratifying in terms of, like, you think in your head, I'm going to learn to play guitar, and maybe in a week I'll be able to play the guitar and it'll sound like what I hear. Takes some time, takes a lot of time, and the baby steps, acknowledging those steps, are so important. So one of the things we try to do is, if you learn to Twinkle Twinkle Little Star and that's what you know, perform it for your parents, share it with your parents. And sometimes the kids are obviously nervous about that, or they don't think it's as impressive as it is, and it is. Not everybody can do that. Tons of adults can't do that. um, and we want the kids to share it, but then the parents, asking or setting up an environment where they're there 100% present and attentive and listening. you know I think that goes so far. And yeah, Twinkle Twinkle Little Star becomes chords, and chords become songs, and songs become bands, and bands have shows, and that does tend to have a compound interest effect over time. But in the beginning, it's so important because who quits after 6 months of lessons? Most people.
You're absolutely right. It's those seedlings that need to be rewarded. One of the dimensions about motivation that I studied is just rewards commensurate to effort. So setting up that environment where you can listen to them and be fully present, that's the payoff that any child who wants to be a musician is looking for. So as parents, you should give that to them right away before they lose their motivation.
Yeah, absolutely. And so let's say you're looking at it from the student's perspective, and maybe they're further along. They've already been playing for quite some time. They've got some facility, but they've hit an inspirational wall. They have no application for what they're doing, and they've lost touch with why they're doing it. What would you suggest for someone in that position?
Well, first, I would suggest to try not to get to that point as much as possible. You want to stay in that, you want to keep that connection to what it is that you love about music in the first place. When you lose that connection, your music actually doesn't even sound as good anymore, even if you are technically proficient and you've met all these milestones in terms of chords and scales and arpeggios. So first, I would say try to avoid that. But if you do get lost, then I think it might be a good time to try something totally new. Maybe a different song, maybe a different genre, maybe even incorporate a different instrument and see if you can find something that you can incorporate into your music.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think with today, obviously YouTube and just the guitar tabs that are available, and there are so many resources that a student who is motivated and disciplined can teach themselves a lot of different things. We definitely believe with Sound Life that having a guide, having a coach, having someone there that's an unbiased but totally invested in you perspective to help organize all of that is extremely beneficial. What are your thoughts regarding that?
Oh, well, I can't agree more. And Sound Life has become so much more than a company that provides music lessons. That personal investment and that presence of a caring person that inspires is it's a complete game changer. And I think that any great musician can look back on somebody that provided them with that.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's why we're here. I mean, I know for me, I can think of that person immediately. Their face is right there. It's never far. And it's not just music, it's teachers in general that had that impact. Um, they're always right there. Their voices, the sayings that their inspirational, quips that they came up with, they're always right there and very present. And so for our listeners or readers, you and I had totally different musical upbringings. And I always find that to be interesting too, because there's no one linear path. My father was a trained classical musician, and I went through a more formal approach to learning to play. And there were some wonderful things about that, but there were also some limitations. From a methodical standpoint, I had creative limitations. But you, from my perspective, were always kind of creatively unleashed. There was no because I don't know. I think somewhere along the lines of not knowing the rules allowed you to break them, or only knowing some rules allowed you to make up your own. But when we're teaching kids, where's that balance between formality and creativity? And how do we marry those two so that we still instill discipline and those things that come from a typical pedagogy?
I had a piano teacher who noticed that I was doing whatever I wanted with all of the songs. And he was pointing out that what I was doing sounded good and it was creative, but that there were elements of these songs that learning them the way they were supposed to be played was going to provide me with. And so he designated certain music for me to play by the book and certain music for me to make my own. And he did provide me with an ear to listen to that music that I wanted to make my own. And that was the part that was a little more rewarding for me and came a little bit more naturally. But then he also pushed me to put the effort into perfecting some things that were going to make me a better technical player. So the word that comes to mind is balance.
That's the same thing. The word that was coming to my mind when you were saying that. Yeah, it's like give and take, and being flexible. And that's where you said when you're recommending to parents is having that ability to know that each case is unique and things change all the time. And so being in touch with your child's interests and what their teacher is working on with them and being able to pivot. And we tell that to our teachers too, like, you got to be able to switch things up. Like you're saying, you were struggling with one thing or doing things outside of the box. Instead of the teacher saying no, the teacher opened up another door for you. So now you feel supported and heard, and I'm imagining that kept you going.
Absolutely. It kept me in that place where I was being rewarded, and it was easy enough that I was not losing my motivation. But there were also elements of my lessons that were difficult enough that I was growing.
Yes, and growth isn't linear, because I mean we can learn we can learn all of the modes and scales that are on an instrument, and we could be very proud that we know all of these things. But what about all of these other elements of music, and how connected are we to those things that we want to be able to do, and how much closer are we to doing them? That's kind of that tricky balance thing. So when we were kids, we had this band, and I did listen to our vinyl that our friend gave us. I've been listening to it on repeat. I just think it's so cool that we have this thing from 22 years ago or whatever, and I'm listening to it, and this is fully thought out songs that do sound quite dated now because this was the end of the 90s and they sound of the era, but these are fully thought out songs recorded in a studio, performed live by 15-year-old kids and 16-year-old kids, where we're not using any digital things to fix pitch. There's no pitch correction. There's no punching in and out. These are live takes. We recorded to 2-inch tape. I don't know if you remember that, but we recorded to tape, which doesn't even happen now. And I think through that process, like we had a natural discipline to rehearse, to promote our shows, to book shows, to record, to make a record. And I think in today's era, that's much more challenging for kids. Um, and we are working to try to still provide that and create space for that. But what are your thoughts on the difference between what we went through when we were kids versus what is existing now?
Well, I think that feeling of playing music and it sounding good is a little bit more accessible with a little bit less effort now. And really just in this current world where everything that we want is right there in our pocket, and so much satisfaction is just available. It's difficult to imagine children having the same amount of discipline to to go the long way and to really work on something and perfect it. So I would whatever someone's mode of creating music, I would just encourage them to treat their music as though it's something that they are nurturing, and don't don't lose focus, and don't move on to the next thing too quickly, because you might be able to develop something really great if you take the time. It's very hard now for people to take the time.
Yeah, but I do think that what we find is that when kids connect with something, and again, you got to move around and look for it, find it. But when you do, they tend to go all in, and they have those resources because, again, it's in their phone, it's in their computer, it's accessible, and a lot of it's free, that they can go very deep. It's just getting that connection, and then having the support system, parents, teachers, to give them the resources to follow that muse. um, yeah, so I think that's very interesting. Another thing that just came to my mind is when we were performing as kids, and even now to this day, when we hang out with our friends, performance is such a big part of our lives. Performance is probably part of our lives, even in our regular jobs, even in your job, and we don't think about it in the same way. But how much did the experiences when you were a kid playing these shows, how much does that influence your daily life now, even though that's not as much a part of it? How much does that still affect you to this day?
I would say that your personality is your most valuable asset. And when I look at myself as that 15-year-old kid playing shows with you, I'm still that person and I'm proud to be that person. And I might not tell everybody those stories, but I still show up as that person, even if I'm doing something completely different. And my my unique perspective is what makes me valuable in my field. And I think that the people that I know that came from a different background, they utilize what they do as well, and what they've been through, their story, it it brings it brings your this is the equation of you, and it brings a different perspective to anything you do, whether it's professional or just in relationships.
Yeah, I agree with that. Now, one thing that you did from a very early point and still do to this day is you sing. You sing and you play, and you're pretty fearless about trying things, learning songs, and you have this crazy catalog or ability to remember lyrics and melodies and things, and chord progressions and all of that stuff. It's just kind of, your brain is wired in a way that you can hold on to a lot. Um, so do you think starting early, I don't know when you started, probably before you and I met, but do you think starting early had a huge effect on you in terms of not being afraid to do those things and to perform in front of people and to sing and to learn songs?
I'm sure that starting early was better than starting later, but I think that I've known a lot of great musicians who started much later, and that aspect of encouragement from all the people around them is even more formative than your development from a young age.
Mm,
So I would say that it is never too late to begin to learn, just as long as you have that inner reward happening.
yeah. And you've got a community that's supportive of what you're going after. um, I know to this day, when we are all together with our friends, we still play and we still sing songs, and somehow we've curated this environment where it feels safe for people to do that. No one seems to feel like they're going to be judged or critiqued or anything like that. It's open, and I think that is probably a stimulus for kids too, to find. Everyone's so scared of what their friends are going to think or their peers, and um, cultivating an environment where you can safely try and express yourself, and it doesn't have to be perfect, and it doesn't have to be anything. It just has to be.
You know, the thing that just comes to my mind is that the people who are encouraging you, whether it's in music or otherwise, those are the people you should be around.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. Okay, so if we're going to kind of wrap our conversation up in terms of parents and students can how parents can relate to their kids and help their kids on this journey, let's just talk a little bit about, we touched on it for a minute, but how we talk to someone who, and it doesn't have to be a kid, it could be anybody, but how we talk to someone to help them on their journey without dictating to them or putting pressure on them or putting our own kind of fear of failure or fear of whatever onto them, how do we relate in a way that creates that environment for them to thrive?
Well, I'm not here to repeat cliches, but they are cliches for a reason. So, first, seek to understand before seeking to be understood. Listen actively and get to know what the person that you're trying to help is trying to say to you. And when you do come from that place, then I think you are more able to relate to the person, but really try to understand. That sometimes means being present, listening. It might mean that when your kid is at school, you listen to their music and get to know what they're into and find out about their friends.
Yeah, I do. I don't know if you did this with your mom, but did you always listen to music in the car on the way to school?
We listened to music in the car on the way to school. I really remember when I was in bed and she was cleaning up, and there was always Aretha Franklin, Sting, Bonnie Raitt, Paul Simon. That was that was how I went to sleep at night.
Well, that's awesome, and that soaked into you, right? And were you inquisitive? What is this? Who is this? What am I listening to?
I was, especially with certain artists. I really wanted to know more, and I would turn it on myself. Just a handful, yes.
And did your mom come to your shows and performances and things that you were involved in at school?
100%. Every performance, my mom was there, and certain other people in my family, they were always right there for anything that I performed, any baseball game that I played, and having that level of encouragement at a young age and throughout life was completely formative for me. I'm very lucky.
Yeah, one thing I suggest to parents, and maybe you can kind of tap into this a little bit as well, is I know as parents, we're always busy. We have so many things going on. And usually when we're at one activity, we're already thinking about the next activity that we have to get to. Or if we have an activity during the week, we're thinking about how we're going to get off work and get back to work and how we're going to make up for the work that we missed. And it is difficult to be at everything all the time. And I suggest to parents, if one parent can't be there, there's always a family friend, an uncle or a cousin or a relative that can be there. And having somebody there, no matter who it is, showcases, that it helps the child, it helps the person that's participating in this event feel that sense of support. And it could literally be anyone that knows that child and has that relationship, which takes a lot of pressure off of the parent trying to be everywhere at once, which is impossible.
That's right. But just knowing that somebody at your performance is on your team,
Yeah,
you'll perform better and
you
more
will
confidently.
perform better. Yeah, and we all know that feeling of looking out behind the curtain to see who's there. And sometimes when the room is empty, because we've all played empty shows, it's not a matter of how many people there; it's who. And an empty room full of 5 people that are there for you. I don't know. It's a powerful thing that does a lot. Um, so anyway, thank you so much for taking this time. I know that you're super busy, and I appreciate you taking the time. But I also appreciate what we've shared today. I hope helps parents, and I hope helps some of our students as well. Try to create an environment where we can continue to stimulate this creativity, continue to inspire kids who are in that beginning stage of learning, and hopefully get them over that hump. I think you would agree that first hump is the hardest one. That
Absolutely. Yes, that first that the hardest part of the journey is the first step.
Yes, I like to always say you don't have to be great to start, but you've got to start to be great. And yeah, but that first bit is really hard. Statistically, for all music related things, we know that there's that drop off in the very beginning. And when we do first lessons with students, it's always great, 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 great excitement in the first lesson, maybe the first two lessons. And then if we don't immediately meet that with an action plan in terms of goals being set and support in place, starts to wither away. And we all want to, as a parent, investing in music lessons. There's the financial investment of it. You don't want to see that investment not rewarded and not gain interest over time by seeing your child having fun and gaining a new skill. But on the other side of that, you truly, and I now know this as a parent, want to see your children thrive. So I do think that as a team, between whoever the music educator is or the teacher is and the parent and the student, all together having a game plan of support, I think that makes all the difference. And we would have far more artists and musicians and creative thinkers in the world if more people had that support system in place.
You're absolutely right. It starts with recognizing and rewarding those small incremental milestones of success.
All right, so parents out there, the next time you hear a little bit of Happy Birthday or Twinkle Twinkle Little Star or Ode to Joy, you get your round of applause ready, standing ovation, and celebrate, because that, as small as it sounds, is a monumental thing. All right, thank you, Justin.
Thank you.